When you read through the book of Numbers, it can feel like a bit of a slog sometimes. It's got a lot of numbers, obviously, and a whole bunch of laws and rules. You might be reading it and think, okay, but what's the point of all this? Why all these details, these sacrifices, these commands? It's a fair question, it really is. But the truth is, these laws aren't just random things God threw at them. They're super important. They show us a lot about God and a lot about people. They're like a big, complex instruction manual for a brand new nation trying to figure out how to live with a holy God right in their middle. Think about it. These people, the Israelites, they just walked out of slavery in Egypt. They've been living under another nation's rules, another nation's gods for generations. Now suddenly they're free. But they're not just free to do whatever they want. They're free to be God's people. And that means learning a whole new way of life. They're in the middle of a harsh desert too. Life is tough. There's no established society, no infrastructure. It's just them, the wilderness, and God. So God gives them laws. These laws aren't just about being good. They're about survival, about identity, about relationship. They're about how a group of formerly enslaved people can become a holy nation, distinct from everyone else, and live in the actual presence of their powerful, holy God. Let's break it down a bit. First off, a lot of the laws are about order and organization. You see this right away with the censuses. God tells Moses to count the people, tribe by tribe. And it's not just a casual head count. It's very specific. They count the men able to go to war. They also count the Levites separately. Why do this? Well, for one, they are moving. They are a massive group of people. If you've ever tried to move a large group of people, even just a school field trip, you know how quickly things can get chaotic. God isn't a god of chaos. He's a god of order. So counting them helps organize them for travel, for setting up camp, for military defense. They need to know who's who and where everyone belongs, and then there's the camp layout itself. It's really specific. The tabernacle, God's dwelling place, is right in the center. The Levites, who are the priestly tribe, camp immediately around it. Then the other tribes camp in specific places around the Levites, grouped into 4 divisions. This isn't arbitrary. It's a deliberate design. This organization tells them a few things. It shows them that God is central to their lives. Everything revolves around Him. It also puts a buffer between the everyday people and God's holy presence. The Levites are the ones who get close, who handle the sacred things. This protects the other Israelites, because God is so holy, too close without proper reverence could be dangerous. It teaches them about the sacredness of God and the need for a mediator, and it brings discipline. Everyone knows their place, their role. This structure is essential for a fledgling nation that could easily fall apart in the wilderness. Then there are all the laws about purity and holiness. Numbers has a lot about it. Things like what makes you unclean touching a dead body, certain skin diseases, bodily discharges, and then what you have to do to become clean. Again, washing, specific rituals, sometimes waiting a certain number of days. This might seem strange to us today, but these laws served multiple purposes. On a practical level, some of them had health benefits. In a crowded camp, without modern medicine, instructions about isolation for skin diseases or washing after contact with death were rudimentary public health measures. They helped prevent the spread of sickness, but the main point was spiritual. These laws were constantly teaching the Israelites about the nature of God. God is holy. He is pure. And if His people are going to live with Him, they need to strive for purity too. Things like death, disease, and bodily functions are natural parts of life, but in a spiritual sense, they can represent imperfection, decay, or things that are less than ideal. They are a contrast to God's perfect, vibrant, life-giving holiness. So, being unclean didn't mean you had sinned, necessarily. It just meant you were in a state that was incompatible with being close to God's holy presence. You couldn't enter the tabernacle or participate in certain sacred rituals until you went through the purification process. This constantly reminded them of the boundary between the holy and the common, between God and humanity. It taught them reverence, respect, and the need for cleansing to approach God. It highlighted that sin, or even just the imperfections of life, creates a barrier that needs to be removed. And think about the Nazarite vow. That's a powerful example of pursuing holiness. A person could choose to set themselves apart to God for a time. They couldn't cut their hair, couldn't drink wine, couldn't touch a dead body. This was an extreme act of dedication, going beyond the basic requirements for everyone else. It showed that personal choice, personal commitment, was also part of this journey of living with God. It was a way for an individual to say, I want to draw even closer to you, God, and show my devotion. These laws were about demonstrating a deep desire for a set-apart life. Then there are the laws about offerings and sacrifices. We see these throughout Numbers, building on what was established in Leviticus. There are offerings for sin, for thanksgiving, for dedication. There are daily offerings and special offerings for various events. The point of these sacrifices was complex but vital. They were about atonement. They were a way for people to acknowledge their sin, their mistakes, and to have that sin covered, forgiven, so they could remain in good standing with God. It taught them that sin isn't trivial, it has a cost, but it also showed them God's incredible mercy and provision. He made a way for them to be forgiven, to be reconciled, even when they messed up. Without these sacrifices, the gap between their sin and God's holiness would be too wide to bridge. They also included Thanksgiving offerings, which taught them gratitude. It reminded them that everything they had came from God and they should respond with thanks. It was a physical, tangible way to express their dependence on God and their appreciation for His blessing. It was a way to maintain fellowship with God, a way to keep the relationship alive and strong. And Numbers even has specific laws about offerings for unintentional sins. This shows that God wasn't just concerned with outright rebellion. He knew people would make mistakes, even without meaning to. And He provided a way for those mistakes to be handled too. It speaks to God's deep understanding of human nature and His desire for ongoing relationship despite human frailty. The book also addresses leadership and authority. This is huge. Moses is God's chosen leader, and Aaron and his sons are the priests. The Levites have specific duties for the tabernacle, but not everyone was always happy with this arrangement. You see the story of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, who rebelled against Moses and Aaron. They basically said, "Why should you two be in charge? Aren't all of us holy?" God's response to this rebellion is swift and severe. This isn't just about protecting Moses and Aaron's egos. It's about establishing God-given authority. These laws and events teach the Israelites that God Himself appoints leaders. There's a divinely established structure. Without it, there would be chaos, power struggles, and confusion about who speaks for God. Respect for God's chosen leaders was a sign of respect for God Himself. The Levites' specific role, too, is key. They are set apart to serve the tabernacle. They carry it, set it up, take it down. They perform duties inside. This is a massive job. And by giving them this dedicated role, God ensures that the sacred space and sacred items are handled properly by people specifically consecrated for that purpose. It reinforces the idea that not just anyone can approach God in any way. There's a proper protocol, a proper way to serve. It protects the holiness of God's dwelling and also protects the people from unwittingly violating that holiness. And then there are laws about justice and community life. While a lot of these are in other books like Exodus and Deuteronomy, Numbers has its own contribution. For example, the laws about cities of refuge. If someone accidentally killed another person, they could flee to a city of refuge to be protected from blood vengeance until their case was properly heard. This shows God's concern for justice, for due process, and for protecting life. It's not just about punishment, it's about fair treatment, it's about not letting a cycle of revenge take over. There are also laws about inheritance, particularly the fascinating case of the daughters of Zelophehad. In that culture, inheritance usually went through the male line, but these women had no brothers, and they argued that their family name and property would disappear if they couldn't inherit. And God rules in their favor, establishing a new law that allowed daughters to inherit when there were no sons. This is groundbreaking for its time. It shows God's concern for fairness, for protecting families, and for adapting laws to ensure justice for everyone, even women who might otherwise be overlooked in a patriarchal society. It reveals God's compassion and His desire for a just and equitable society for His people. The laws also touch on the journey itself. There are specific commands about blowing trumpets, different sounds for different purposes, like gathering the people or signaling to move out. There's the constant presence of the cloud by day and fire by night, which determined when they moved and when they stopped. These aren't just travel logistics, they are constant reminders of God's active guidance. The trumpets are a human-made signal. The cloud and fire are God's direct, unmistakable presence. It taught them absolute dependence on God. They didn't decide when to move. God decided. They didn't choose the path. God led them. This built trust. It ingrained in them that their whole existence, their progress, their very lives depended entirely on following God's lead. It prepared them for living in the Promised Land, where they would still need to rely on God for everything, even if the physical cloud was no longer there. And finally, a lot of these laws are about covenant and remembrance. Take the command to wear fringes on their garment. This wasn't just a fashion statement. The fringes were there to remind them of God's commands, so they would look at them and remember to obey. It was a tangible, visual cue, a constant prompt throughout their day. The various festivals and appointed times, too, are peppered throughout Numbers. These are times of celebration and remembrance. They recall God's mighty acts of deliverance, his provision, his covenant promises. These festivals weren't just parties. They were communal acts of worship, designed to build a shared memory, a shared identity, and to constantly reinforce their relationship with God. They prevented them from forgetting who they were and whose they were. They kept the covenant alive in their hearts and minds, generation after generation. So, when you step back and look at all these laws and numbers, what's the big picture? What's the ultimate point? It's about holiness. That's probably the biggest theme, because God is holy, utterly separate from sin and imperfection, and he wants his people to be holy too. Not because he's a cosmic killjoy, but because holiness is necessary for them to live in his presence without being consumed. The laws are the framework for how to live a set-apart life. They create boundaries, teach respect, and provide ways to deal with sin and defilement so that the relationship can continue. It's about order. God is a God of order, not chaos. A nation, especially one on the move in a hostile environment, needs structure, discipline, and clear roles. These laws provide that. They prevent anarchy and allow them to function as a cohesive unit. It's about justice. God cares deeply about how people treat each other. He wants his people to be fair, to protect the vulnerable, to provide recourse for wrongdoings. These laws lay the groundwork for a just society. It's about dependence. Every law, every ritual, every command, every signal points them back to God. They depend on him for food, water, guidance, protection, forgiveness, and their very identity. The laws are a constant education and reliance on their creator. It's about separation. Israel is meant to be different. They are God's treasured possession, a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. These laws set them apart from the idolatrous, immoral nations around them. They define what it means to be God's people, and it's ultimately about preparation. They aren't staying in the wilderness forever. They are headed the promised land. These laws are like their boot camp, their training period. They are learning how to be a nation under God before they settle down. They are learning the principles they will need to live by when they have their own land, their own cities. You could also say these laws reveal God's character. They show his holiness, yes, but also his incredible patience, his desire for relationship, his mercy in providing ways for forgiveness, his justice, and his meticulous care for his people. They show that God is not a distant, uninterested deity. He is intimately involved in every aspect of their lives, from how they set up camp to how they handle a dispute over inheritance. So the laws and numbers aren't just an old list of strange rules. They are God's way of shaping a group of former slaves into a distinct, holy nation capable of living in his presence. They provided the structure, the protection, the moral guidance, and the path to reconciliation that allowed God to dwell with his people, even in the midst of their imperfections, as they journeyed toward the future he had promised them. For they were a training ground for life with a holy God setting the stage for everything that would come next in their story.